Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Big Ten, your daily podcast on the Big Ten Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's stop on the spring football tour goes as far west as the Big Ten Conference goes. We are in Cornhusker Country to talk about those Huskers of Nebraska. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Big Ten Podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ben Stevens. It is Wednesday, April 21st, and one of our three final stops on the spring football tour today is in Lincoln, Nebraska, to talk about the Huskers of Nebraska, year number 4 under Scott Frost. So, of course, joining us as our tour guide today in Lincoln to take us through how spring practice has been going for those Huskers, it is Nick Handley, the host of the Nick Handley Show on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, our dear friend, back on the podcast, feeling good. Nick, there were fans inside Memorial Stadium this past Saturday. What was the excitement level like to watch the Huskers play this spring?
Well, I got to go off pure secondhand accounts because I was in another Big Ten country. I was in State College for Nebraska baseball and Penn State, which they also had their game going on as well. So I couldn't give you reports on that. I could tell you, though, that Nebraska baseball swept Penn State. But it was, yes, they did. Yeah. And another sweep. They swept Minnesota and now Penn State. And
to interrupt you before we go spring ball, Nick Handley, Nebraska baseball is having a very successful season in the Big Ten Conference. Are they not?
They are. They're having a very good – they're 18-6, their best start since 2008, which ironically – this is the last time they hosted a regional, and that's kind of the conversation right now. Got to get into the rankings first. There's some stubbornness when it comes to trying to rank Nebraska, but that's a conversation for another day. But yes, to your original question, I think, and you're starting to see this around the Big Ten, where programs, even in college football, programs are just trying to re-engage with their fans. And as you know, Ben, being covering Nebraska football here for a while, the spring game will get a lot of attention. It'll have more of that game day atmosphere. But this was what I kind of compared to maybe what you would typically see in the NFL when you have normal years with, in the summer when you have training camps going on. It's open to the fans. So you might see some drills. You might see some 5-on-5, 7-on-7 work. You might see some scrimmaging. You might not. And I think fans understood there was really no certain agenda that they could expect going into Saturday, other than the fact that they had a chance to see this team work out for 2.5 hours. And I think overall, everybody's excited to just kind of get out to Memorial Stadium and just see the guys in pads running around and actually having some type of, inter-squad competition.
Nick, it's my favorite thing about spring ball. Really, it's a glorified practice when you get to the spring game or whatever it might be, but it always brings hope and optimism for the next year. And that's always the case with Nebraska. Even if the years before have been a little bit of a struggle, once we get to spring football, into summer workouts and fall camp, there's always optimism for this Nebraska football program. It is now year number 4 under Scott Frost. His record overall at the helm of the Huskers, just 12-20. Not where Nebraska fans or Scott Frost want that to be. So with all the hype that goes into practice and in spring ball, what do you want to see, Nick Handley, from the Huskers this spring?
Well, I think there's two things, and one of those has been kind of happening since really the offseason and winter workouts, and that is less drama. Stay under the radar. Keep things just moving forward where people aren't necessarily talking about your program in the offseason, because unless you're Alabama, unless you're Clemson, the offseason conversations about those teams are always going to be, okay, what's coming up in the draft and what are the chances of those teams being back in the college football playoff? Ohio State, same thing. But teams like Nebraska, typically when they're brought up in the offseason, it's because of transfers. It's because of more negatives. And yeah, Nebraska's had their share of transfers, and those things were probably beyond their control. And so other than that, and then, of course, the big Oklahoma-Nebraska debacle when it came to the schedule, it's like they are. And that's the bottom line. They are playing. But the bottom line is just get back to the business of football and getting this program better. And I think since they've kind of steered through all that other stuff, that's where they are. When you listen to the coaches talk about this team, especially on the defensive side, there's this looks okay, but we need to see it on Saturdays. Yeah, this position group looks good, but we need to see it on Saturdays. On the offensive side, There still is a little bit of that optimism. I wouldn't say propping guys up and trying to drive any type of hype train, but Scott Frost has spoken very highly about what he's seen out of the wide receiving group, which is going to be a big thing. Matt Lubick has talked about that a lot too. But, the second thing that I want to see, other than, under the radar, back to just football, the second thing I wanted to see is just the overall development of that wideout group, because I don't think there's a lot of drama when it comes to quarterback this year. We kind of know what Adrian Martinez is. So I don't think there's any big mystery of, well, if he goes and has a great spring, he could turn into something that I just don't know if he is. Running backs, I think you could probably have a similar conversation as you would with the wide receivers. But the one area going all the way back to year number one when they had J.D. Spielman and Stanley Morgan there has been wide receiver where it has just not been consistent. You just have not had good depth. And that's including Wan'Dale Robinson when he was kind of used more as a running back. So they need more impact guys out of that position. This is the perfect time to develop those guys. And this is the perfect time to get here with Adrian and sort of a normal routine, which they missed out on last year.
So there's not so much drama around that quarterback position, but obviously the focus is going to be on whoever the quarterback is for the Huskers, and that man will be Adrian Martinez. Not so much a competition this spring, but Nick Handley, where do you think Adrian has the most room in his game to grow, and what did you want to see out of him in this spring practice?
In the last couple of years, you've seen him get out in the open, but he doesn't outrun people as much. So he's kind of made that commitment to not only work on his game, but also sort of drop the weight that he doesn't need and kind of put on that lean muscle that's going to kind of get him a little bit more fluid as a runner. So just, small tweaks like that, for all indications, just trying to clean up a little bit of some of the throwing mechanics, but the what that needed to be done there. So I think for him, it's just kind of fine-tuning things. But the bigger thing with Adrian is figuring out how to limit the turnovers. And that's not just going to be an Adrian thing too. That's going to be wide receivers. That's going to be running backs. And most importantly, that's going to be the offensive line and what especially they get from the center quarterback exchange.
Yes, Cam Durgan's, I hope he's a little bit more accurate in his snaps. Do you think the offensive line, is it the wide receiver groups? What's the biggest question mark in your mind on the offensive side of the ball for the Huskers in 2021?
I think it's one of two, and I think it's wide receivers and running backs. Now, with wide receivers, I think there are some very intriguing guys there. You've got the Montana State transfer. He was an FCS All-American in Samori Toure. Lot of good things about him. And he's already shown it at a high level, at the collegiate level, albeit the FCS level. But that's a guy who's played a lot of college football and a guy that's fit in pretty nicely. He really likes this offense. He likes the pace, and I think he could be a go-to guy. I don't like mentioning his name, and this was one of the highlights at the spring practice, and that is Omar Manning. Apparently, Omar Manning looked like kind of a man amongst boys. And again, it's just a matter of having him out there every day. So great to hear that on Saturday, but just getting him on the field every day, that's what you want to see. But if he does come around, and if this thing is now getting better with Omar, he could be a big-time player. You've got Xavier Betts, the fresh, now sophomore out of Bellevue West, tall guy, got a lot of speed. He's another guy that you hope can take a step forward. So there's guys in this wide receiving group that you feel like, okay. Also another guy, Oliver Martin, the Michigan, then Iowa, now at Nebraska transfer. He's a guy that has some freakish athletic ability. He was, I think, a 44-inch vertical, and they're lining him up on the outside. They're lining him up on the slot. He's a guy that they really think is, now that and he got here late. Remember, he did not have a spring like nobody else did too, but he got there late in the summer. So he was kind of playing catch up, and they sort of dumbed down the offense when he played. But you saw him get a couple of snaps last year in a couple of games. I think he even had a start there towards the end. So now he's a lot more versed with this offense. I think that's a good thing. And then another guy, Will Nixon, keep your eye on him. More of that slot guy, a guy that runs great routes. He's very reliable. He's not going to blaze you with speed, but he's a guy that, again, can catch the football. He can be a weapon in space, so it's something that they like with him. Now, the running back is where I'd say the bigger question is. You've got Marquise Stepp, who is missing the entire spring. He's the USC transfer, and this was someone that I think they're really leaning on. It could be sort of the bell cow or their number one. Missing a spring. He's still all he's watching spring, but he is not an active participant. So had foot surgery. It was an injury that apparently they didn't even know he had when he got there. So they're taking care of it now, hoping that he'll be fine in the summer. Savion Morrison is another guy that they really like as a freshman that, we'll find out. But then there's, guys like Marvin Scott, Ramir Johnson, Ronald Tompkins, some of those guys that we've heard of, but we just haven't seen in an extended role. And then another guy to keep your eye on, just because we're hearing about him in the spring, because he's got more reps because other guys are missing time, and that's Jacquez Yant. He is a 3-star walk-on out of Tallahassee, Florida. So those are names, but I would say the running back group is still such a mystery because that, like the wide receiving group, it just hasn't been reliable. When you had Dedrick Mills last year, you felt really good about him in 2020, but then he got banged up and he couldn't stay on the field. So just finding somebody that can stay healthy, somebody that you can rely on in the backfield there with Adrian Martinez, that's going to go a long way. But I would say that's probably the one position with the most question marks. That's 1A. I'd say 1B is wide receiver. You asked about offensive line. That's the one area that I think a lot of people feel good about.
You said a lot there, and that was a very thorough and complete and insightful roster breakdown of the wide receiver group, of the running backs, even the offensive line. But the only name I heard was Omar Manning. Give me some Omar Manning for Nebraska. I absolutely love it. I love the conversation around him. If he can stay healthy and be on the field, he will be a huge facet for that Nebraska passing game that, frankly, Nick Handley needs to go downfield a little bit more. We want to see some of that in 2021. Adrian Martinez in 2020, just about 7 yards per passing attempt, the slowest of his career so far at Nebraska. Omar Manning, everybody across the Big Ten. Yeah, go ahead.
And Ben, you said the key phrase right now that's being used by all of the offensive coaches, and that is the downfield passing game, the downfield attack. They knew how bad it was last year. There was no confidence, whether it was receivers that were unreliable, quarterbacks unable to get the ball downfield, or offensive line unable to sustain blocks, or again, timing being off because of bad snaps, all of those little things. But that has been a huge area of focus. And all of the wide receivers, when they've talked to the media during spring, they are lighting up. Their faces are lighting up about the downfield game. It seems like it's definitely on tracks. Guys like Cam Taylor-Britt, one of the best quarters, then said, yeah, it's a lot different. It looks a lot different. So again, all this stuff is great, and you hear a lot of this stuff during the spring. It needs to show up on game days, but that is definitely a point of emphasis for this offense, is being able to find that downfield pass attack that was non-existent last year.
So as we flip to the other side of the ball, 9 potential starters returning for Nebraska in 2021. What can we expect out of the defensive unit for the Huskers in 2021?
Probably the most talked about competition that's taking place is that corner opposite of Cam Taylor-Britt right now. And there are some interesting bodies there. A guy like Braxton Clark, who was probably going to start last year, then he got injured a year ago. So he's coming back from injury. And you've got a lot of younger guys that also look to sort of factor into that position as well. So there's a good competition going on there. And then really the only other thing that we're kind of looking at with this defense in the spring is building depth of defensive line. Again, kind of similar theme with this whole defense. You've got so many guys back, a lot of upperclassmen back, a lot of starters back. So what are you building behind those guys? And that's kind of been the big challenge. And I think overall, point of emphasis for Erik Chinander and for this defensive coaching staff is just being able to shore up some guys that if there is an injury with the, say to a Cam Taylor-Britt or to a Deontay Williams in the secondary, or a guy like JoJo Doman, who is limited right now during spring, or a guy like Will Honus, guys like that played a lot of football, but in case one of those guys goes down, you got some younger guys that have played some, but they got to be ready to take some bullets too. Defensive line in the same position. So I think it's just all about being able to build depth, but they've had a very business-like approach, which I got to be honest, it's refreshing. It's great to see. It gives me the idea there's a quiet confidence with this group, and I think there's a reason a lot of those upperclassmen return for that extra year.
A lot of starters back on defense. Do you think the best overall returning position group for the Huskers this upcoming year is on that defensive side of the ball?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's hard not to. I think, and, Cam Taylor-Britt, I've talked a lot about him. Just think about this for a second. Wan'Dale Robinson and Adrian Martinez, I think, were kind of like the faces of this program the last couple of years. Now you kind of look at the face of this program besides Adrian, but as far as representing a kind of a good personality, but also tremendous ability, and a guy that's probably going to put himself in the conversation of maybe the top 2 rounds in the upcoming draft in 2022 would be Cam Taylor-Britt. So he's backing it up with his play, but when he talks to the media, he's hilarious. I mean, the guy's always out there having a lot of fun. The players respond to him so well. And the other thing is he's made it very obvious to the coaching staff, to the media, he doesn't want to come off the field. He wants to play special teams, obviously defensively. He was kind of joking around saying that he's talked to Scott Frost. He wants to catch a couple of footballs too on the offensive side. The guy flat out, I think you get the idea. This is going to be his last year because he's most likely going to leave for the draft. This is a guy that he means so much to this defense. So you do have sort of a face of this football program, not just the defense, but this football program actually being a corner. I can't really remember the last time we've said that.
I think in the Scott Frost era at the helm in Lincoln, these are the most playmakers in the defensive secondary that I can remember, with Cam Taylor-Britt not only backing up his talk with his play on the corner, but also a hard hitter. You could also bring the same about Deontay Williams. I can't wait to see this Erik Chinander defense in 2021. So, Nick Handley, we have a long time until the 2021 season opener for Nebraska against Illinois. It is a doozy of a schedule. We got to go through summer workouts, fall camp, and all of that. But what do you think is a realistic level of expectation for Nebraska this upcoming year?
It's got to be bowl game. It's got to be 6 wins. And I know that might sound like you're underselling a program that has bigger goals, but as we always said, and I feel like this program is exactly where this sort of phrase would be appropriate. Nebraska is still building. They're trying to establish that foundation. So they always say, right, you got to crawl before you walk. Okay. If Nebraska wants to be amongst the best in the Big Ten West and getting a chance to play at Lucas Oil Stadium on that final Saturday on championship weekend, you got to be able to get to that level of getting to 6 wins first. And 6 wins with this schedule would be very good. Now, on the other side, people might be saying, hey, how do you get 6 wins out of this schedule? That's going to be challenging. It really is. I feel very strongly that Nebraska will play on week 1 after that Illinois game, and they'll have a bye week much later in the season. So whether it is Southeast Louisiana moving up to play them in week 1 or Nebraska playing Southeast Louisiana a couple of years down the road and finding somebody else to play, they'll have an opportunity to go either 2-1 or 3-0 before they take on Oklahoma. And so that's going to be interesting. Just the start that Nebraska can get off to, I think will tell you everything you need to know about the growth of this program. But no matter what people say as we get closer, whether people start really buying into any kind of hype, which, again, I don't know how you can do that based on what you've seen so far. It's okay to be encouraged. It's okay to be optimistic, but you got to be real. So right now, anything more than 6 wins, that's great. You'd obviously accept it. But right now, that's got to be the goal. That's got to be the standard. 6 wins, get to a bowl game, feel good about that, and then build on that for 2022.
Nebraska fans, you're listening to this podcast today. Heed the words that Nick Handley just said. I think that was beautifully stated in terms of realistic expectations, but not being discouraged by those, being encouraged, on the other hand, of where this program can go. Nick Handley always giving us that expertise, the insight that he brings with the best of them when it comes to covering Nebraska sports. Nick Handley, the host of the Nick Handley Show on AM 590 ESPN Omaha. You can hear me on that show most Mondays. Now Tuesday, we're having a lot of fun with everything we're doing. Nick Handley, I appreciate your time as always, my friend.
Thanks for having me.